real estate's an amazing tool, but don't let the tool like control the thing you're trying to build, which is an amazing life. You measure life in heartbeats, and you measure life in time, and you measure life in relationships and the kind of quality you have with those relationships. And so that's the way I look at real estate investing. It's like, it's fun, it's a cool tool, but like the point is to have a bunch of time and flexibility and cash flow. It's more about return on your life and return on your time than it is on your money in the end.
If you're wanting to break into the real estate game in 2024, you might be asking yourself, is now a good time? And I actually believe that it is. But there's a very specific strategy that you should be following more than ever in 2024. And in today's episode, I bring in my good friend, Coach Carson, to talk about the small and mighty investment strategy that will help you build financial freedom with fewer properties. What? That's right, we're not talking about going out and building an empire. We're talking about going small, nimble, and lean. And you'd be surprised at how this low and slow strategy can turn you into a millionaire faster than you think. On today's episode of Raw Build. Oh man, I feel like I'm on the spot here. We're in the midst of an upcoming recession, doom and gloom. The media will have you think that real estate is not a good time, or the f***ing ale. Can we edit this, or is this like one take? We're in the midst of a recession, according to the media. They want you to think that real estate is not something that you should be doing right now. And I know that you're kind of crushing a lot of different strategies. What, in your opinion, do you think people should be doing right now in 2024 if they want to get into real estate?
Yeah, I think like big picture, I think not getting overwhelmed by the media, by the attention, by the economy, but also just thinking like big picture, you don't have to have that much to make a really big, significant difference financially. I think that's my main kind of message is that, let's say you don't have any properties yet, and you're like, man, I'm behind. All these people have 30 properties. I missed the boat in 2021, 20. I missed every boat. I should have bought it then. But the thing is, like, I think if you buy like one property every year or two, and you do that for the next 5 years, like you're in good shape. And it's there's a stock investing principle called dollar cost averaging.
Sure. Yeah.
Where you just always buy into the market. You always buy. And like it's the best approach to stock investing because you're not trying to like figure out, is the market at the top, is the market at the bottom? It's just like, no, I always buy. And if the market goes down and you're in a recession, you might buy 2 or 3. If the market's really high, you might have to really struggle to get a good deal, but maybe you buy 1, but you're having to like work really hard to get it. And that's just the nature of real estate investing. And so I think that's the message is like, yes, worry about the economy, the ups and downs, but like keep your focus on the big picture plan, which is just get a property a year. Just get it, move forward, and we could talk about strategies to do that. But I think that's really hopeful to me when I hear messages like that. It's like, no, you don't just relax. You don't have to like compete with everybody else. Just get your foot in the door, and then take another step, and take another step.
I can already feel the comments on this podcast where people are like, great, step 1, have enough money to buy a rental every year. So I want to talk about that, sort of the strategies that one can actually employ to do this. I've got one that I really like, but listen, this is your thing. I know that the small and mighty kind of investor mindset is sort of what you own, which is like, hey, like have a very lean, nimble portfolio that can help you build financial freedom. Right. And going back to what you were saying about dollar cost averaging, all that stuff, I often tell people that I'm a big believer that no matter what deal you buy today, good, bad, awful, amazing, doesn't matter. You will look like a genius in 30 years if you can withstand it through the maturity of your loan.
Which is that's the big strategy, right? It's like if you buy in a good location, I 100% agree with you. You can wait it out. You can be patient. So that's the reason cash flow and financing, all those things those techniques we talk about are so important, aren't they? Because you got to live to see the other day. So really the name of the game today is like, all right, like the person who's objecting, like I don't have the money to buy today, or how am I going to buy property with an 8% interest rate or 7.5% interest rate? Well, we got to figure out strategies that solve that. And yes, if you don't have $100,000 sitting in your lap right now, you're going to have to be more creative than somebody who does. Like it would be nice to have $100,000, but I'll give you my origin story in a different era, a different time. But it was also with rising prices. The interest rates were like 6 or 7% when I started in 2003.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
6 or 7%?
Yeah.
I thought you can't get into real estate when it's 6 or 7%.
That was what they were. And what I had to do though is I looked at every single deal as if I had the money. So I said, all right, is this a good deal? If I had $100,000 to put down on this deal, I know I don't have it, but how could I make this deal work? Like, what kind of financing would I get? What would the cash flow look like? What exit strategy would I use? Short-term rental, long-term rental? And so just be a good deal maker, period. And if the deal works for someone with $100,000, then I can go to, there's a lot of people who have lazy money who are looking for somebody who has a good deal that they're willing to manage, that they're willing to turn into a short-term rental.
What do you mean by lazy money?
So these are people who would love to get into investing in real estate. They've watched the YouTube video. They're like, yeah, that sounds really good, but real estate's a hassle. I don't want to do that. It's the time issue.
I've got money, but I'm really busy.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's for someone who doesn't have money. It's hard to believe, but there are like probably 10 times more people like that, or there's 10 times more money than we need. It's real. Like if you have a good deal, like if you can just focus on understanding the fundamentals of buying a good property in a good location and putting the deal together, don't worry about how much money it takes to buy the property. You could even pay cash for the property if you have the right passive investor who's willing to put up the money for you to buy the deal.
Interesting. So you think the art of kind of finding or sourcing the deal is the most sort of valuable component.
Absolutely.
In going out and finding someone, let's say a doctor or a lawyer, high income earner.
Yep.
They have $100,000-$300,000 stowed away.
Yeah.
They've always wanted to do real estate, but they're kind of like, I want to do it, but it's just not my bag.
Absolutely. And I'll give you an example. I mean, this is a real deal that I was the lazy money person. So I can give you both sides because I've been the entrepreneur with no money. I've been the person with money. So I have a partner who found a deal in Montana. This is an 8-unit property. He has already done a few short-term rentals, and I've gotten to know him. I trust him. That's an important part of this story too. We kind of got to know each other first. But he found this deal that was too big for him. He's like, well, the seller wants $2.2 million for the property, which was probably too much. But he said, I want to offer like 1.7, but I don't have 1.7 million, and I don't have 20% down or 30% down for a commercial loan. So he came to me, and I'm the lazy money in this case. I'm like,
you had $340,000 hanging out. Is that how much?
Yeah, it's actually double that. Yeah, so we ended up putting 30% down on 1.7. So what is it? Yeah, it ended up being like, including some repair costs, like $650,000.
Wow.
$650,000. So we were the money people, and I evaluated the deal with him. I ran the numbers, but he had to pitch it to me. So the art of the deal was he found a seller who had built this property in 1989 himself. Like he had owned this property ever since then. It's a beautiful, nice little 8-unit building that he's kind of underperforming on the short-term rental. He doesn't really have any tech. He's not using all the, the modern, management stuff for short-term rentals. It's right near all the breweries in downtown Kalispell. It's got really, really easy, good maintenance. It was well built. So it had all the things that made it a good deal. The numbers had to be negotiated, but eventually he got the numbers negotiated too. He just didn't have the money. And so what my point is like if you can learn to kind of do that, find the property, negotiate it, and then have the money on the sidelines, the world's your oyster. You can do any deal you want to do if you're willing to share it. And I'll give a little metaphor. I'm from the southern United States. We like to eat pie, right? We like sweet potato pie, pecan pie. And so imagine you're going to like a fair and they're getting rid of all the pies. They're like, hey, this pie's worth $20, but we're selling it for $2. We're just going to get rid of them. And so I would call up my friend. I was like, I don't have any money, but can you Venmo this vendor $2 and I'll give you half the pie. I'll eat half the pie. Now think about that. The person who pays $2, for them, that's like a super good deal because they were not going to get any pie, and now they're eating the pie for $2. They're getting half the pie.
They never would have known about it either.
They never would have known about it. For $2, they're getting half a pie. For me, I didn't put up any money. I got half a pie, but I'm the one who found the pie and brought it to my friend. And that's exactly the way it works with real estate. But I think a lot of people get blocked by the fact that they're not willing to give up half the pie, or 20 or 75%. Like whatever you got to do.
I think the way you're laying it out is a very logical thing, but a lot of people wanting to break into this world, they get so set on this 50-50 thing, and like, if you're going out and raising money and you know nothing, you should be okay with a 10% stake in the property, 15, 20, 25. You don't have to get 50-50. You're getting a free house, in my opinion. So do whatever it takes to get into that first deal, because I'm sure even if you gave that person 25% of the pie, if you will, you would probably invest with them or in them again if they brought you another deal and actually did a good job in that first one.
Absolutely. It's a long game. So I've done this. I've been the money person, as I just told you on that deal. I started on the other side where I had a guy named Dr. Stone, who was a Clemson business professor that I met when I graduated from Clemson. And I went to him saying the same thing. Like, I think I can find deals. I found this foreclosure property that's worth $125,000, and I think I can buy it for $60 and put some $20,000 in repairs into it. And he's like, oh, that sounds good. I was like, but I don't have any money. Would you put up the money? Yes, I would. And so he put up a down payment, and then he went to the local bank and got the rest of the money, and we figured out a way to split it. And of course, there's details on how to split it. And
sure, of course.
Those are issues, but the point is, like, in 2024, in 2003, in 2050, this concept's going to be the same. You've got the money, you've got the deal, and you've got people who want both of those things. And if you're the deal maker, you're the one who is controlling the valuable part. Like, this is the most valuable part. The deal, the money will come, but you got to figure out how to find the deal and then operate it. Which I know the cool thing about short-term rentals is if you know the tech, if you know the systems, if you know the processes, you know the local laws, like, the person with the money doesn't know all that stuff. Like, that's really, really valuable intellectual property that you have. And so,
which is kind of funny because it's not that hard to me. Like,
No.
it's all very, I mean, obviously I've done it for a long time, so I'm just more attuned to how it all works. But like, that is the type of stuff that for people that have no interest in real estate or going into that world,
right,
they're just never going to learn. They're like, oh, I have zero interest in learning that.
don't even want to.
And they like very much value that side of it, where I'm like, well, that's actually kind of the easy part. I actually think the hard part is always finding the deals. you know?
The deal finding is hard. I agree. But I think that the confidence you can have knowing you have an exit strategy and you know what the rent is, like, that's really valuable, because that confidence is the currency that gets the deal done. Because you're going to that person with the money saying, hey, I'm confident that we could rent this thing and generate $140,000 a year in income from this rental. And that gives you the confidence, the confidence to know, okay, well, he could pay me this amount of money in interest or my half of the profits or whatever. So that confidence of the deal maker, I think, of the operator is like so
For sure.
critical to be able to buy it, to be able to finance it, and everything else.
So let's go back a little bit and actually talk about sort of this approach of having this lean, nimble set of rental properties.
Yeah.
Because I was watching your channel not too long ago, and you had this video about how 5 rental properties is all you really need to be financially free. How does that really work? Like, how could 5, because I think of rental properties and I'm like, okay, well, 5 $200,000 long-term rentals don't really seem like they can make you, like, quote unquote rich.
Right.
What is the actual strategy there?
Yeah, so I'll give a long-term rental and a short-term rental variation on this, but long-term rental, the example of my video there was, if you own 5 rentals, and like, let's fast forward. I know this, we're gonna kind of go to the end of the story first. Like, let's say you eventually own these properties, and in my case, I think a simple scenario is just pay the debt off. Like, and so like let's say I'll give you a couple examples how you can do that. Let's say you own 10 properties. You bought 10 properties over the last 15 years, and then you sell 5 of them, make a good profit on those 5, and use that money to pay off the debt on the other 5. Just one example. It's one way we could do this. You now have 5 rental properties, and each one of those rental properties, let's say, has a $1,800 rent, maybe $2,000. But my goal there is that when I pay all my expenses, I have $1,000 left over. But because I don't have any debt on the property, that $1,000 it just goes to my bank account. Like, I don't have to pay the bank anymore. So $5,000 times 5 properties is
25 grand.
$5,000, right? So that
$5,000, sorry.
$5,000, $60,000 a year. And maybe, depending on the part of the country, the amount of rent, that could be more or less. But for a lot of people, having $60,000 coming in, and
It's a salary.
It's a salary, yeah. That's replacing something. And if they wanted $120,000, they could have 10 properties instead of 5. Like, this is a scalable concept. But I think some people, just to get their head around the idea, they're like, wow, like, think about how many people work for 50 years, and they go and get a Social Security income that maybe is like $1,500, $2,000, maybe, that, and here we are talking about buying 5 rentals or 10 rentals. They can produce $60,000 to $120,000 a year with a long-term rental, right? So now let's use the short-term rental example, and let's say you know short-term rental numbers better than I do, but sometimes you can double, triple your cash flow on the right property, right?
Yeah, 2 to 5x for sure.
Yeah. So let's say you had 5 short-term rentals that you had really dialed in. These are your best ones. You've sold off some of the ones that were kind of the duds. And now instead of $1,000 per property, maybe you're making $3,000 per property. And now 3,000 times 5 is $15,000.
180 grand a year.
180 grand a year. And that number, like, man, how many people have a part-time business, which is managing 5 short-term rentals like a full-time gig? Like, can you do that part-time? I mean,
yeah,
right? I mean,
probably not. So I guess one thing I don't want to glaze over, because going back to that investor that's probably watching this, ready to comment, great, so have enough money to pay off 5 rentals.
Yeah.
What is the actual strategy there? Like, how does one pay off a rental? Like, is this a fast thing? Does it take a couple years? Or are you saying, hey, long and slow, and just by the time you retire, it's all paid off?
Yeah, it's all in phases, right? So like, let's start. I talk about it in 3 phases. You have a starter phase, a builder phase, an ender or harvester phase. So the harvester phase is when you're paying off the debt. most of us, though, probably people watching, if you're just starting, you're in the phase, just get a property. Like, use leverage. Like, you probably don't have enough cash right now. This is where you go partner with someone, or you do a house hack, like get in with 5% down on a owner-occupant loan. Like, you just got to get in the game. And all of us started with like having to scrape up the money. Like, everybody starts that way.
It's rare that someone gets into real estate with like, I have a lot of money.
No.
Let me just blow this thing up.
No, that rarely happens. So you got to start somewhere, but get a property or two, learn, get your foot in the door. And then the second phase is building. And this is where you just have to be patient a little bit, but this is where you're like loading up 1 property per year, 2 properties per year, whatever. And your goal is to have 5 or 10 properties, but maybe you overbuy a little bit. I like that strategy a lot. So this is all stuff I've done.
When you say overbuy, do you mean like pay more than it's worth?
No, buy more properties than you need. So let's say my goal is to end up with 10 properties. This is what I did in our case. So in 2007, we bought 33 properties in 1 year. Like, we bought a bunch of too many properties.
Dang.
Right before
33 properties in a year?
Yeah, right before the recession. We were geniuses. Like, we
were
like, here we go. All right, Bear Stearns just collapsed.
It hadn't collapsed yet.
No.
Okay.
No, we were just like, let's go, let's buy,
How did that one pan out? Just out of curiosity.
Well, we survived, but we had our cash flow was like this monster roller coaster for the next 2 to 3 years. It's like, okay, we're okay, and bam, we're losing $15,000 a month, and now we're doing great. And the only thing that got us through that was hustle, but also we had 130 grand in the bank.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask, because like 15,000. If you're a W-2, were you W-2 at that time?
No, full-time real estate investor.
Full-time, okay, yeah. So if you're, full-time real estate investor, I mean, really anyone that's making less than 180 a year, it's like losing 15,000 a month is painful.
Yeah, it was not every month, but we had a couple months.
Sure.
And that kind of thing would happen where we underestimated repairs on a property, and now we're over budget by 15 grand, 20 grand. And
got it.
We're feeding the property.
Literally every renovation I've ever done.
Yeah, pretty much us too. So I guess my point there was like you try to load up on properties, whatever that means to you. That was kind of a heavy load. Some people can buy, if you want to end up with 10, maybe you buy 15 or 20 properties during that building phase. And this is still using leverage. You have to use debt, you've got to use partners, whatever you got to do. And then the end of the game, though, is like, all right, how do you get to the point where you can pay off properties? Well, if you hold properties for 5 or 10 years in the right locations, you're going to be paying the debt down on the property just every month with your amortization. The rents are going to be going up, hopefully. The price is going to be going up over time. And so that's when you have some equity built up. And that's the name of the game. Like, if you had to boil this whole thing down, real estate is really about growing equity so that you can turn it into cash flow.
Okay. So how do you actually make that bridge, or how do you cross that bridge? Because obviously the idea here is you wait and the house is going to be worth a lot more in a couple of years. But the interesting thing about equity is that it is kind of trapped in limbo, right? You're rich on paper, but you can't actually do anything with it.
Yep.
So is there any strategy that you can use to actually tap into that equity to sort of supercharge the cash flow?
Yeah, I know a lot of people talk about refinancing, and that's great. Like, you could use that to buy another property, but I think when you finally get to that harvester phase where you're like, all right, I want to actually live off the cash flow. I want to do something that's more unorthodox than most real estate investors do. Like, I'm actually going to pay taxes when I sell a property, and it's a strategy of just saying, let's say I have $1.5 million in equity in these properties now after 10 years of just holding them, and I sell some of them, I pay taxes on them, and maybe I make $500,000 or $600,000 from the properties I sell, and I just use that money. So I'm unlocking it for my equity. So I'm unlocking it. And
so you're saying instead of 1031ing into more property and leveraging, you're saying, hey, I'm just going to take the hit, apply it to the properties I have.
Yeah, that's one. It is like people are going to be screaming in the comments about how bad of a return on investment that is, or how I could buy a lot more properties and make more cash flow, but you'd also be taking a lot more risk.
Yeah.
And you'd also be having more hassle, and you can do that. Like, I'm not saying that's a bad thing to do. But what I'm saying is I think most people who get into real estate are doing this because they want to have free time, flexibility, cash flow to do something else. Like, I don't think most people are empire builders. I think that's like a small number of people. Most people want to get those 5 or 10 rental properties and then have a bunch of free time to coach their little kids in Little League, or go travel to Spain for a year, or
they're not so focused on the actual kind of micro ROI analysis and all that stuff. I mean, I think it's one of those things where it is funny to me, because we talk about what's a good return or a good cash on cash for a property, and we're always like 15%, 18%, 20%. If we can get 20% in short-term rentals, that's the golden number. And they get so wrapped up on like, I'll have students that come up to me and they're like, man, this one's only like at 18%, Rob. Like, what do you
Instead
think?
of a 20.
And I'm like, dude, who cares? Like, the interesting thing is, it's like, how much money do you actually want to make? And I think that's more important.
Look at the number.
Like, is it like, because I'll take a 10% return, $1,000 a month. Like, that's cool with me. And people overcomplicate it, trying to assign some arbitrary like worth, you know, their worth based on how good of a return they can get. I'm like, are you making $1,000 a month?
Right.
That's awesome. Do that 10 more times.
That's it. And ultimately, it's more about return on your life and return on your time than it is on your money in the end.
Yeah.
The money is just a tool. Like money is just an amazing tool. Real estate's an amazing tool, but don't let the tail wag the dog. You know that old expression. Don't let the tool like control the thing you're trying to build, which is an amazing life. And you measure life in heartbeats, and you measure life in time, and you measure life in relationships, and the kind of quality you have with those relationships. And so that's the way I look at real estate investing. It's like, it's fun, it's a cool tool, but like the point is to have a bunch of time and flexibility and cash flow. And so for me, like a very simple portfolio that's low risk, high cash flow, low hassle is like the ultimate place to be, because you can keep growing later on if you want. But you have this, you've kind of like built this little castle, this like fortress around your life. And you said, all right, I am building this like economic fortress so that I don't go back. So that place I started with of being in poverty or not having a lot of money or being scared that I can't pay my bills, like I am not going back there. Like I'm gonna build this fortress of these 10 little properties that are gonna provide cash flow. Like I call it like an income floor. Like this is my cash flow floor. And then if you want to keep growing from there, you can start over. You could build another empire. Like you can start scaling again if you want to. It's not like the end of the road, but it's like a stake in the sand where you're like, hey, I am not gonna go backwards on this thing. And that's the beautiful part about it. It's like it's so simple to pay off debt, but it's what the savviest financial people on Wall Street do. Not even Wall Street, like Warren Buffett, big S&P 500 companies. If you look at their balance sheets, they don't have 80% debt. You know, when they're 30, 40, 50 years into their business, they have...
Yeah, you got to take some chips off the table, right?
Take some chips off, yeah.
And basically what you're saying is you could go out and re-lever and buy more real estate, but you could also just take the quote-unquote worst return and live a happy life because you have low debt and you have now cash flow that pays you a salary.
Yeah, low stress. Like, I've been through a great recession, and so I know the stress of like having the market be out of control when you can't control anything. Like you can't control whether banks will loan you money. You can't control whether interest rates are going to be 10% tomorrow or 5%. So there's so many things we can't control. So when you take those chips off the table, not only are you increasing your cash flow, but you're also giving yourself peace of mind that you're like a fortress, literally a fortress that if we have a depression, if we have inflation, like all these different weird things that could happen, I've got this ship that's like really strong and not gonna sink. That's basically it.
So how do you feel, just out of curiosity, since you've been around the block a time or two?
Got the scars to prove it.
Yeah. So how do you feel like today's sort of economy and climate match up to what you went through in 2007? Because they're obviously very different.
Yeah.
But do you feel like we're on the verge of something? Do you feel like we're on the verge of a quote unquote soft landing? Like where's your head at with like the current economy?
It definitely feels different. Like going into 2007, there's a lot of building now, but there's a lot more building then. Like I still feel like we're like, the thing that was like the really big signpost for me then when I look back now was how many single family houses that were built in my area. There was just like subdivisions everywhere that were underway. And there were condo buildings in Florida on every corner, you know? So like it was a major overbuilding in that time. Now we could get there in the next year or two. Like there's a lot of building going on, but the numbers I see is there's still pretty strong demand. The demand curve is
that's
there.
what it seems like. I mean,
yeah.
It's hard to fathom, and I know it's not like just as simple as I'm oversimplifying it here, but like people screaming from the rooftop of like the housing shortage and the lack of housing.
Yeah.
But then we're also building a lot, and there's too much supply. But at the end of the day, it seems like there's not enough supply for in a lot of these cities. Like I used to live in LA. I lived there for 5 years. Dude, it's like the supply there is like there's nothing there. It hasn't changed at all.
I think it's going to be localized oversupplies, but if you look at the big picture, LA has structural issues that are going to never allow there to be enough housing. Zoning, NIMBYs,
zoning is a big one.
You know, not my backyard. So it's just there's so many uphill battles, and you know, politics as they are, the one thing I know is that local politics is hard to get developments approved. It's so difficult. So if that's the case, if you're an existing housing owner in one of those locations where it's hard to build new construction, you're basically buying something that's short on supply. For better or worse, we can argue whether that's a good thing for society. I don't think it is. I think we should build more. But as a real estate investor, our strategy is to buy places with limited supply that have high demand. So even in LA, man, if you're buying a really good location and you have a property that cash flows today, chances are, and that if LA continues to have a good economy and the Hollywood's still there and all these things that make LA, yeah, good. It's gonna be good over the long run. Same with Atlanta, Georgia. Same with New York City. Like all these big economic hubs around the country, like you're good. And it's also going to be tough to build over the next 10, 20 years. So I'm bullish. I think there could be ups and downs. That's why I think you should have good cash reserves to kind of go through those storms. But next 10, 20 years, I'm very bullish on what we got.
I'm pretty bullish too. I would say the one market that I'm in that I've seen is Austin.
Yeah.
Austin was a crazy market there because during the pandemic, people were offering like $200,000 over asking.
Right.
People were just paying gobs of money to move there, and then now you're seeing those price cuts.
Sure.
It's really the only city that I've seen in my kind of portfolio where you're just like, oh yeah, okay, the equity's dead there a little bit.
It makes sense, but I think it's also going to be the one. Tell me, because you know Austin pretty well. What are the fundamentals that make Austin awesome? Like, what has that changed?
Well, I will say kind of back then we had a lot of tech companies moving in. We had a lot of big companies moving in and basically paying relocation packages and all this stuff. And so people were coming in saying like, okay, yeah, like I'm moving here for this huge job.
Right.
Tech is moving in. I'm going to pay the extra $200,000 because I'm making a lot of money. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
And a lot of those companies, from my understanding, have moved out.
Right.
And then tech is also taking a bit of a haircut right now. And so I think everyone's just trying to get out. But the problem is they can't get out that easily because they overbought the properties.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, and the answer might be Austin's in trouble, but like the next 10 years, 20 years, like the things that I understand to make, as an outsider looking at Austin, the attractiveness of doing business in Texas, the attractiveness of being in a big college town that's also the capital of the state, the fact that it's just got a vibe and a culture that's different, like it's just hard to replicate in Austin, right? When I see a place like that, I think like more of a short-term opportunity when you have these people with upside down and negative equity. It's a supply shock, but is the long-term demand of why people move to Austin changing? Like, I don't know. Like, it's an open question. It's an open question.
It's still a great city. So for sure, fundamentally, I think Austin is always going to be a cool place to live.
Yeah.
I just think we're in this weird stalemate where everyone wants to live there, and then everyone that has the houses doesn't want to cut their prices. So for the first time, like you go onto Zillow, you go onto Redfin, you type in owner financing, creative finance, subject to.
People are willing to do it.
And, oh my God, dude, they're everywhere. There's dozens and dozens.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. It is, yeah. So and the deal I have out there is a creative deal.
Yeah.
It really only would have worked as a creative deal. Like if I had bought that property, I don't think it would have worked really. So so you're kind of bullish overall on real estate, but you want to still kind of have these cash reserves, maybe be a little bit more on the conservative side.
Yep.
I want to go back a little bit on sort of the strategy here of acquiring a property every single year. Because I actually think there's a few powerful ways to do this. Me and David Green, back in our Bigger Pocket heyday, we called this the sneaky rental strategy. Yeah. Are you familiar with this?
So we owner-occupy a property? I love it. Yeah.
You go in, you buy a property for 3.5% down. It's an FHA loan, whatever. And you live in it for a year.
Yep.
And then after a year, you go and you put 3% down on the next property and you move into that one.
Yep.
And if you want to supercharge it, you house hack. But the idea is you buy one property for 3% down every single year for 5 years, and you keep moving as long as you're willing to do that. And at the end of the day, the reason that strategy is so beautiful is because 3% of 200,000 or 300, wherever you live. Every time I say a number like 200,000, comments are like, wow, he must live in the middle of nowhere. Let's say 400,000.
Yeah, whatever.
3% of 400,000 is, let's see, 40,000 is 10%, 20 is 5. So like $15,000 to buy a $400,000 house.
Yep.
That to me seems very achievable, and it doesn't require you going out and saving $80,000 for a 20% down payment. How do you feel about that? Because that's kind of like really going levered and putting very little down. And it actually is a lot of the times, a lot of the people who don't have equity find themselves in a tough spot because they can't sell the house that they got to relocate within a year and stuff like that.
I mean, I'm with you and David. I love the owner occupied to rental strategy. I think if you could do that 3, 4, 5 times and get your 5 rentals, that's awesome. I think the only challenge would be just like the rental cash flow on top of your mortgage. Like, I think if you wait long enough, it's going to work. Like
I see. So it may not necessarily cash flow
right off the bat,
now.
right? Because you're highly leveraged, because your payment's bigger. But like, I think if you
and PMI.
Yeah, but maybe you mix that with another strategy. Maybe you say like, I'm going to do that every 2 or 3 years. I'm going to live there. I'm going to wait for the rents to catch up. I'm going to do something to the property. Like maybe you have a strategy like we teach is that you have, you're going to cosmetically improve the property. Maybe you're going to build an ADU on the property with, you're going to put some sweat equity in it. Maybe there's a, wing of the house that you can like turn into an ADU and not with 15, 20 grand of your own, sweat equity or something. Like if you can like do something to the property to force the rent to be higher, then it's beautiful. It's even better because then you can then move after a year and still have some cash flow coming in. So like, I think if you combine strategies like 3.5% down, perfect. You're getting in the door, and then do something creative with this property to make more cash flow, and then keep it as a rental instead of selling it. Like
that's a good way to think about it. I've done that a few times. My LA property was a 2-1, and underneath there's this 279 square foot bonus space.
Right.
That was really gross when we moved in. So we remodeled it. I'd spent $3,000 remodeling it over 3 months. Every night I'd come home from work at it was LA, so I probably got home at 7 just because of the traffic.
Yes.
And I'd go and give my wife a little kiss, and then I'd go to Home Depot and I'd buy a Red Bull and sour cream and cheddar chips
The best.
and whatever my
Food of
supplies
champions.
were. That was my dinner for 3 months straight, and then I would go into that studio and fix everything. And it was really cool, but as a result, I went from having this uninhabitable place to this place that made $2,000 to $3,000 a month in basically cash flow, and that was awesome. And then I was like, man, how do I do that again? And I built an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, in the backyard, and then that brings in $2,000 to $3,000 a month too. So between those two things, I was living mortgage free, and it was a really, really. I mean, I think it's just for me. I love this idea of like you buy these properties, you cosmetically add to it, or you add some type of like revenue stream, and then you figure out how to get your mortgage or your rent down to zero. I think that's really like the first thing that every investor should do is like, how do you get to zero?
Yes.
Because the moment you can start stacking that $2,000 a month that you would pay in rent, dude, like I think your financial journey kind of just compounds from there.
Yeah, for everybody who's willing to do what you just did, that formula, like think about all the different pieces that you're putting together that you couldn't do if it wasn't real estate. Like you're able to control a $600,000, $800,000 property with a small down payment. That's amazing. That can only happen in real estate with leverage. Then you're able to like use your creativity and ingenuity and your hard work and your sweat. You did it for 3 months. It's not the end of the world, right?
Yeah, it's great. I had a fun time doing it.
Isn't it cool? Yeah,
it was the first one. I wouldn't do it again.
Yeah,
but at that time it was like I really felt I was unstoppable.
I did the same thing. I bought a fourplex as my first. Like, I had another house that I was in over my head on. I just moved out and kept it as a rental. But this is my first residence was a fourplex, and I moved into unit number 2. I was the one cleaning out. I didn't do all the work, but I scraped the floors up, and I did a lot of dirty work. And I look back on pride on that. Like that was great. Like it was a fun time. And for those who are willing to do it, real estate gives you the opportunity to have sweat equity, high leverage, and then eventually control this really big asset that's going to go up in value over time and appreciate over time, and the rent's going to go up over time. You're going to pay the debt over time, but that hardest thing is getting in the door. So I'm 100% agree. I think if you can do owner-occupied to get started on those first 2, 3, 4, 5 properties, like that's the ticket. And now you have this knowledge. And going back to my prior example of like, if you have the knowledge of how to put deals together and to do that stuff, the whole world is open to you. Like literally, yes, you got to learn how to pitch somebody who has $500,000 to put the money up for you, but that's a gap that you can close
for sure.
A lot easier than you think once you have the knowledge how to put that deal together.
What's really interesting is I really love this like 5 properties can change your life thing, because if I just think about like the 5 primaries that I've had in my life in the last 7 years since I started this. Before that LA house, I had this Kansas City house, and I bought it for $159. It went up to $215, and I sold it, and I made like 40 grand, and I used that to buy the LA house. 3.5% down, a couple like seller credits. I actually only put down $18,500 on the $624,000 house, which was like great. Now that house today is worth about 1.2. So it's almost doubled in value, which is amazing. I then went on to go live in Tennessee. I bought that house for $510,000. That house is now worth $850,000.
Right.
And then from there, I went to live in Houston, and I bought that house, and it's gone up $100,000. And so, like, the last 3 primaries that I've bought cumulatively have brought me about $900,000 in net worth. Just from playing the slow game and not selling them. Now, had I kept that Kansas City house, I wouldn't be here. But it is kind of funny that the way I always think about my whole journey was that Kansas City house was like $5,000 out of pocket to buy it. And I got into this little $159,000 house. It appreciated. I took that to leverage into sort of the next thing. And it's really kind of created something pretty interesting for my life.
It's amazing.
It's kind of crazy how just 3 properties right now, I could sell them all and I guess retire in Bali if I wanted to.
Yeah, you could do it. $60,000 a year. You could be a king, right?
Yeah.
It is. That perspective, though, like I feel sometimes that's lost, and it's cool to talk about the big deals and a lot of, like, I love that stuff too, but I think for most of us, it's just like, let's reflect on that, like 3 properties, all owner occupied, or 5, whatever it was, and now you're basically a millionaire. With that property. How much would that change the lives of most people listening to this to have $1 million in equity? That if you did just sell it all and just cleared the money and just put it in the bank, like you would have, a big chunk of that left over, right? Or you could just do what we're talking about earlier, just consolidate and have a simple little portfolio. But that's real money, like that's real wealth, and it started from, the $40,000 you scrounged up, the creativity you put into the deal, the hard work you put into it, the knowledge you're learning from listening to a podcast like this. I mean, that blows my mind that what the opportunities are in the United States in 2024. Not like, I know we're thinking like, oh, that was 6 years ago, but what do you think is going to happen 7 years from now? Like, there's going to be somebody today buying that property with 3.5% down today in 2024 who's going to have $1 million 5 years from now because they did it.
It annoys the hell out of me whenever people are like, oh, well, he got in when it was easy and this and that. And I'm like, well, why is the fact that I took action sooner than you my fault that you never took action on your own journey? And that's why I tell anyone that's like, oh, you got in when it was easy. I was like, well, you didn't. So why are you mad at me? You should be mad at yourself. Like, you'll never be mad at yourself that you got into the game. You'll only ever be mad at other people that you did it, in my opinion,
I've never met anybody who said they wished they would have waited to buy real estate. I've never met anybody. Even people who don't like real estate, they're like, well, I'm pretty glad I bought that property 30 years ago. This now,
it always works out.
So it's a yes, there's risk. Like we've talked about the risk and being conservative, but like ultimately you gotta get in the game when you're a newbie who's just starting. You just got to find one little angle, 3.5% down, owner occupant. That's a great one. That's a great way to do it. But whatever your angle is, like you just got to get in the game. And then the beautiful stuff starts after that because your knowledge starts compounding, your relationships start compounding, the money starts compounding. But that compounding machine never even starts if you're like just sitting on the sidelines. Like it's just, you got to get in the game and find a way.
We're really only talking about, we talked about 50% of the actual benefits of real estate in this podcast. We talked about you've got cash flow, which we all love. Cash flow is king. 2, equity, which is great. But we didn't even talk about really the tax benefits that compound everything. And then debt pay down. We talked about paying down debt with like taking your equity and selling and paying down. But we didn't actually talk about renters paying down your debt. And so that's kind of like this interesting bar graph where as your appreciation goes up, your loan balance goes down, and then you got tax benefits that save you money, and then you got the cash flow on top of it. So it's really a delicate ecosystem, but if you play it consistently, you'll retire a millionaire. I really think you can.
Time is your friend. Yeah. I always the best metaphor for real estate now that I've been in it for 21 years is like you're a tree farmer. You're like a fruit farmer where you plant these seeds of these little apple trees. In the first 3-5 years, it's like, I'm not sure this apple tree is a good investment of my time because I'm having to keep watering it and feeding it.
There's no progress.
But that thing is growing. That seed is growing, and that $40,000 is that seed that you planted. And yes, you can't live off the $40,000 seed. You can't live off an apple tree in year one. And that's what a lot of people complain about rental properties being negative cash flow the first year or two. Like, you're going to have some ups and downs and some things you learn on. But now that I'm 21 years into this, I've got this orchard of fruit trees that it's like they're mature. I don't do a lot with them now. It's like I did all the hard work on the front end when I planted it and nurtured it. And now you have this orchard of fruit trees that feed you the rest of your life. And that's amazing.
Yeah,
Like,
but you
that's,
planted that when the soil was very fertile, you know? Like, it's easy for you to say.
Yeah, the weather was good back in
The weather was good,
2003.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's always I mean, I agree. It's just, it's like a wait. And I think the first 5 years, very hard, because it really is, you're not going to see any difference on your debt pay down or anything like that. But I'm in this thing, I'm coming out of that. I'm on the 7-8 year train.
Yep.
I'm like 2 years away from being in this thing for 10 years. And I've seen crazy things happen in my real estate portfolio. And like sometimes the cash flow isn't great. Sometimes it is. Mostly, obviously, like I make very good cash flow. But when I actually look at the cash flow, the cumulative cash flow of all my investments, they actually pale in comparison to the equity that I've built in those properties.
Same.
You know, so a lot of people are like, oh man, like, yeah, I just want to make that cash flow. I'm like, dude, I've made like 3 times more in appreciation than I did in cash flow.
Yeah, I like them both. I love cash flow too.
Me too.
But I really underestimated the power of having wealth, of just, and, you know, wealth and cash flow are always related. I know David talks about this, you know, a lot too, but ultimately, like, you can take one and turn it into another. Real estate, but it happens slowly with real estate. Like, if you have $1 million in equity, you could be like cash poor and not be able to pay your bills, right? So there's a balance there.
Time, yeah.
But like, my wealth has gotten to the point where I can sell a few properties, I can refinance those properties and turn that into cash flow. And so that's the beautiful part about it.
Well, awesome, man. Well, where can people find out more about you? Where can they get your book? All that good stuff.
Yeah, Coach Carson, any of the platforms out there. If you're watching on YouTube, I have a new video every Monday, so I'd love to connect with you on that. Leave me a comment, let me know how you're doing. And then my book is called The Small and Mighty Real Estate Investor. Bigger Pockets published that, so you can find it on Bigger Pockets. You can find it on Amazon, and it's kind of a guidebook for this stuff we're talking about today. But how do you build a strategy and then put the plan together to buy a property, finance it, manage it, and ultimately get it to the point where you can live off of it.
By the way, if you want to learn more about my portfolio and how I became a millionaire through real estate, you should definitely check out this video right here, where I break down the entire process and journey.